My name is Chloe and my pronouns are Sandy. I am niche educational programming director. Thank you for sharing this space with us. I am a white queer settler. This ultimately signifies that I benefit from resources and resources generated and disseminated by First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous persons, Indigenous disabled persons, as well as two-spirit people. I currently reside on the traditional territory of the Underwater and Indigenous, Haudenosaunee, and Nunavut peoples to the territory of the Algonquin peoples will forever be my home, and where I first learned from Indigenous communities. As a community-based researcher and a doctoral student, I am continuously learning about the intersection of oppressions that are experienced by Indigenous disabled folk. Through my work, I commit myself to unlearn knowledge embedded by colonialism and recognize the systems of operations that remain at the forefront of education. I strive to improve my own learnings of the world that I readily benefit from. The National Educational Association of Disabled Students needs is a buy-in for cross-disability, cross-Canada charitable organization supporting both access to education and employment for disabled both secondary students and graduates. Needs work across three strategic areas of the reduction is experience in class and on campus, as well as employment. By doing so, we offer a variety of event resources revolves financial assistance programs and opportunities for both disabled students and disabled graduates. We collaborate with post-secondary stakeholders, other non-governmental organizations, employers, disability service providers, and community members to improve opportunities in post-secondary education and the labor market. We also provide ongoing advice to the Employment and Social Development Canada and provincial and territorial government to promote programs and services that support post-secondary education for disabled students. De virtual access for all projects is a 2-year project with an additional 2 year expansion. My application funded by ESDC support student learning program. This project aims to empower and support disabled students while they navigate through the many facets of post-secondary education. NIMS recognizes the layers of ableism and other forms of oppression prevailing within these institutions. Our team thus strives to offer programming in which mutual care and collaboration is at the forefront that provides the base for discussions and research sharing. Some examples of programming include, but are not fun are not limited to the following: monthly webinars, as well as reports highlighting challenges and successes within post-secondary institutions through disability and intersectional lenses. Lastly, this project as allowed in its version of financial assistance program and funded auch Accessibility Resilience Program. With that being said, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome today's guest presenter, Dr. Fiona Whittington-Walsh. Fiona is a disabled scholar and lead advisor on disability inclusion and accessibility at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Today, she joins us to discuss her research from her project documenting the experience of Indigenous and non-Indigenous disabled and deaf post-secondary students across British Columbia. This project has a collection of personal stories identifying the many barriers that post-secondary students experience. These barriers have their foundation in colonial ableist ideas about who belongs in post-secondary education. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm just going to share my screen. This is always the scary part for me, making sure that I can share. Everyone, so I'm sharing now. I can't see anyone, so I'm just assuming that I'm sharing my screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'd like to start off, of course, by recognizing and honoring the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwantlen, Katsi, Simimiamu, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, Qayqayt, and Kwantlen nations, on whose territories Kwantlen Polytechnic University's campuses stand. And today I'm coming to you from my home office, and I'm sitting in a very pink room. It was a child's room at one point, so it's pink, and there's a blue curtain, and there's also a Victorian dollhouse in the background. And my home is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Stolo people, people of this land since time immemorial. So Mission in the Fraser Valley in British Columbia is situated on the Matsqui, Seamath, Kwantlen, Katsi, Sequelets, and Lakamo traditional territories. It's important to acknowledge the land and territory where we are situated as a way for me to actively engage in my unlearning. It's a way of recognizing my journey and recognizing the inherent rights of Indigenous people of Turtle Island. I am a white, cis, female disabled settler. My parents immigrated to Canada in 1956 from England, although my father never saw himself as an immigrant. My mother recognized that she was an uninvited visitor, as do I. I'm a mother to Savannah and a grandmother, they call me Beeboos, to 7 wonderful grandchildren. My pronouns are she, her. I have rosy red rosacea cheeks, brown gray shoulder length hair. I wear dark grim glasses, and today I'm wearing a blue shirt. I describe myself as a further way of situating myself on this land and making sure that anyone that is not seeing me can envision where I am and where I look like and what I look like. Okay, so my clicker isn't working, so excuse me 1 second. I have to bring up my, for some reason, oh, okay, I gotta use the screen, sorry. So that's situating myself, sorry. So now I'm borrowing from the work of Susan Birch. And she recognizes that access is an incomplete process in general and in this work. So I've tried to make this presentation as accessible as I can. I'm grateful to the support of Needs is providing for this talk and in making it more accessible. Now, a little bit about me and my role at KPU. So I am the lead advisor on disability, accessibility, inclusion, and I'm also the creator and director for the Including All Citizens pathway. And this is one of the first fully inclusive 4-credit post-secondary programs to include students with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. Students who use the pathway are fully included in academic courses for credit and on par. So Including All Citizens has created an inclusive pathway into post-secondary education. Including All Citizens demonstrates a commitment to the legal and moral responsibility to remove barriers for students with disabilities. It's about transformational change within the institution. Now, Including All Citizens students do not need to satisfy any English requirements to be accepted. Including All Citizens students do not need to prove that they have a disability. There is no medical model here. Applicants fill out a short expression of interest and provide 2 letters supporting their application. We meet with applicants and have a conversation. We want to know about them. We are starting to build relationships. So this is a key aspect to Including All Citizens. We are recognizing their life experiences rather than just educational credentials. This is recognizing that many students have experienced educational barriers and possibly educational trauma. We are not lowering admission standards. We are creating a different way of assessing students and giving them the opportunity to be able to develop those skills in a fully supported learning environment with their peers. This is a, oops, sorry, missing my clicker. This is a holistic, critical, inclusive pedagogical approach, and this benefits all students. So what does it look like in class? We do not adapt or modify the curriculum. We are not, quote, dumbing down. It's about transforming the way that we teach. So learning outcomes remain the same for all students, and all students get access to the same resources. Now, I also support the university with disability, accessibility, and inclusion initiatives outside of Including All Citizens, including I co-chair the university's accessibility committee, and I also support policy revisions and creations. Now, key to my role is also supporting instructors with inclusive and accessible pedagogy to transform their teaching and to be able to teach to a wide range of learners, including students with disabilities, and about building supports into their pedagogy. Now, today I'm introducing you to my research, which is about transforming post-secondary education. Now, a little bit of background on academic accommodation. So in British Columbia, the British Columbia Human Rights Codes prohibits the, quote, denial or discrimination in the provision of services customarily available to the public. To ensure compliance, post-secondary institutions must remove barriers to participation experienced by persons with disabilities. The duty to accommodate is a legal obligation to accommodate individuals in a protected group that face adverse hardship due to policy, practice, or other barriers. Now, a reasonable accommodation, quote, must be based on documented individual needs and, quote, does not change the learning outcomes. Students with disabilities must meet academic requirements. Now, reasonable accommodation does not impose undue hardship on the institution. So undue hardship is demonstrated in the following ways. One, the cost of the accommodation is too high, and it's really important to remember these things as we go through what students are telling us about their experiences. Two, the institution can't receive outside funding to cover the cost of the accommodation. And three, health and safety concerns associated with the requested accommodation. So if undue hardship is met, the accommodation is no longer reasonable and will be denied. Now, the most requested accommodations in post-secondary institutions right across the country is extra time, flexible deadlines, extensions, extra breaks, note taker, and recording of lecture. Now, the process for students receiving academic accommodations, students with disabilities have to register with their school's accessibility office. They must provide medical documentation explaining their disability or medical condition. In some cases, a psycho-ed assessment is required, and it cannot be older than 3 years. It is a long bureaucratic process. And in the end, if, quote, successful, an accessibility advisor will determine the accommodations the student is eligible for. Now, academic accommodations are founded on that medical model of disability. This model sees people with disabilities as persons with problems that need to be cured. The medical model creates a hierarchy of need. This is because the system is overloaded and is attempting to provide services to as many people as possible. End of quote. So individual needs and supports are abandoned for a universal approach, where a singular diagnosis, autism, for example, comes with a predetermined set of accommodations. Now, under this model, disabled and deaf students attending post-secondary institutions are seen as a small population of students who require special services and accommodations. Now, research has demonstrated that this type of thinking puts students in a very vulnerable position to have to disclose the perceived, quote, deficit, which further facilitates the students seeing themselves as a deficit. Many students don't disclose or seek these services due to its medical model foundation, as well as a lack of understanding of the disability support process. This causes passivity, where students are not encouraged to advocate for the supports and accommodations they require, or to be able to even express or even understand how it is they learn. Faculty are often left out of this process, only receiving notification of an approved accommodation for a specific student who has somehow satisfied diagnostic requirements. So the effects that this has on students: passivity, lack of self-advocacy, internalized ableism, the belief that you're not capable of success, fear over disclosure and of being resented by peers, having to prove or legitimize your support needs, feeling judged, attempts to downplay your disability to appear, quote, normal and not a burden, end of quote, and of course, additional stress. Now we know, according to NEEDS, that only 5% of adults with a disability are attending post-secondary institutions in Canada. The medical model is one of the reasons why the percentages is so low. Now I'm going to introduce you to my research. So in 2021, I created a survey to document the experiences of post-secondary students with disabilities. I received funding from a 3-year Irving K. Barber grant and a grant from the Social Justice Committee of the Kwantlen Student Association. This research was done in collaboration with my research assistants, Andrew Miller and Taylor Glaspie, both disabled students as well. In creating the survey, we collaborated with numerous experts, making sure the survey questions were in plain language, accessible, and useful, including disabled students, the National Educational Association for Disabled Students, Indigenous Disability Canada, self-advocate leaders in BC, representative from post-secondary services for students with disabilities, experts in universal design for learning, such as Dr. Jennifer Hardwick, who was at Kwantlen with me, and also Dr. Sherilyn Bassani, who is the survey design expert. Research ethics was approved through the Provincial Research Ethics Platform because the research was occurring on numerous BC institutions. Now, the survey questions were a combination of yes, no, not applicable. And students also had the ability to write in their responses. We believed that it was really important to understand who the students are, let students explain who they are, and describe their experiences in their own terms and in their own way. We provided lots of opportunity to share their experiences directly on the survey and share their experiences they did. I will come back to this in just a minute. Now, starting in fall 2021 through spring 2022, the survey was sent out to all post-secondary institutions in BC through their student unions. I wanted to send the survey out through the unions to emphasize that this is not part of their institution. It was not a survey from their institution, that students could safely share their experiences. We did weekly reminders to the student unions and wrote the emails to students to be sent out. We also shared via social media. Now, we had 141 responses from 11 institutions. This gives us a snapshot of who our disabled students are and their experiences. We have a rich collection of personal stories, identifying the many barriers disabled students experience at post-secondary institutes. Now, once we wrapped up the survey and before we started doing that deep dive into the data, I was approached by a colleague of mine at KPU, Simon Driver, who teaches in the Employment and Community Studies program. He approached me at the Indigenous Disability Canada's 2022 Wellness Gathering in Victoria. Now, Simon is also a drama therapist. I told him about the research and the survey, and he asked me if I had ever thought of disseminating my research using theater. Wow. I had not thought about this, but I was looking for accessible, interesting ways to share the results. So I said, let's do it. Let's collaborate on this. Because of this, I decided to change 2 ed plans at KPU in order to be able to teach a policy studies class in fall 2023. This class was called Policy Studies 1200, Inclusive Communities, Sustainable Futures. This course was a part of the Including All Citizens pathway, so it was a fully inclusive and richly diverse class. Academic accommodations policies were a key aspect of the course. I thought how amazing it would be for policy studies students to study the accommodation policies at various post-secondary institutes in BC, while simultaneously exploring the lived experiences of disabled students with those very policies, all done through theater. Throughout the term, our amazing students critically explored the policies and procedures from various institutes across BC. Simon joined our class every week for the last hour. We started off the first few weeks exploring theater via exercises and games. Now, introducing the lived experiences of those very policies we were studying was critical to our unfolding knowledge. After week 3, I started introducing students to some of the quotes from the research. This was done as just quotes with no identifying features, no disability, no gender, etc. was identified. In small groups, students started turning those very quotes into vignettes. This was a fully participatory experience, including all of us, and led by our students. We were also joined by Vicki Haynes, an Indigenous studies instructor and Indigenous performer who guided us with performance expertise and self-care. It was Vicki's suggestion that at the end of each of the vignettes, we have a reaffirming closure so that we were not leaving ourselves and our audience in trauma. Using Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed methodology, the vignettes were created. We performed the vignettes live at an Indigenous Disability Awareness Month event I organized in November 2023 on KPU's Surrey campus. We were joined by our elder and residents who welcomed everybody. We were also joined by Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, Stephanie Cadeau, who gave opening remarks. Our then Parliamentary Secretary on Accessibility, Susie Shant, sent in a video greeting. Neil Belanger, the Executive Director of Indigenous Disability Canada, introduced Smokey Sumac, Tanaha two-spirit poet and artist who performed readings of some of their work. Dr. Rihanna Robson, University of Northern British Columbia Indigenous and Disabled Scholar, was our second keynote speaker and shared her work on Indigenous conceptions of disability. Vicki Haynes, again, guided our audience with embodied exercises to prepare us all for the work of the day. We had ASL interpreters as well as a graphic artist documenting the event. It was important to me that we start the conversation with Indigenous experts and scholars about Indigenous conceptions of disability. I believe this connection and dialogue is central to transforming the current system and how students with disabilities experience post-secondary education. It's about transforming disability policy through Indigenous solidarity. Now, key to Augusto Boal's work is audience engagement with the performance. All audience members were given the opportunity to write down their ideas about each of the performances, and I offer that to you as well, because you will be watching a few of the films based on the performances that we did. So we're asking everybody to think about and answer these following questions. So what is the barrier the students are experiencing in the vignette? What would you change? And what would have made it more accessible? And of course, all of this becomes additional data. Now, most importantly, in our performance, we did not act out disabilities. It is the barriers we identified, not specific disabilities or specific intersecting identities of our survey respondents. We are not being personal in our depictions. The characters are not based on any one person, nor do we identify any one particular institution. We identified systemic ableism and the impacts it has had on the experiences of disabled students right across the province. These barriers cover the entire system. We are not blaming one part of the institution for these barriers. The survey results clearly demonstrate that ableism is widespread in BC's post-secondary institutions, including accessibility accommodation services and with instructors. These vignettes were created from the lived experiences of the disabled students that were shared over and over again in this survey. We have done everything we can to maintain the anonymous nature of this survey, as well as maintaining our commitment to sharing the experiences, listening to them, and proposing recommendations. Now, this past summer, we filmed our 5 vignettes with the creative genius of Gordon Cobb, who is faculty member and a videographer at KPU. So today I'm going to share the films and some of the survey results with you all. Now, the films are not closed captioned and they're not audio described yet. I'm working with a Vancouver company that is actually working on them this week, and I should have them all by next week, so I apologize for that. But I have turned on my subtitles on my PowerPoint, which will also pick up most of the dialogue in the film, but we know that this is not 100% accurate. So now, a little bit about some of the results of the survey and who are our students. So based on how participants describe themselves, we created the following categories: neurodiverse, mental health, physical, and also sensory. Now, the age of our survey respondents, so we had 2% were under 18, 48% were between 18 and 24, 25% were 25 to 34, 15% were 35 to 44, 3% were 45 to 54, 4% 55 to 64, and 2% at 65 plus. I won't give you very many more statistics because we're mostly interested in the lived experiences, but it is important to share a few statistics just to kind of situate the students a little bit. So now, gender identity, I must emphasize that these are the terms, these terms are the ones that students use to describe themselves. We did not provide drop-down lists of choices. We wanted to have the students describe themselves in their own way using their own terms. So 68% of the responses identified as female, 13% as male, 17% as non-binary, 2% as transgender, and 2% identified as gender queer. Now, racial background, again, using their own terms, 74% identified as white, 9% as South Asian, 5% Indigenous, 2% Latino, 2% Middle Eastern, 1% Asian, and 3% preferred not to answer. Now, when we ask what best describes your disability, and this is how we got our disability categories, 56% describe themselves as being neurodiverse, but within that 56%, 78% identified having multiple disabilities. 42% identified as having mental health, and out of those, 92% identified with multiple disabilities. With physical disability, 37%, and within that, 81% identified with multiple disabilities, and with sensory, 11% identified with sensory, and again, 69% identified as having multiple disabilities. Now, we asked a series of questions regarding the supports that they were receiving, and we asked, are you satisfied with the supports you're receiving? So 65% said yes, 47% said no, 11% said not applicable or didn't want to answer. But when examining all the responses, particularly I was interested in looking at who was saying yes. And as I said, we had lots of room to write in your responses. You could see that actually 5% of the responses for yes were actually yes, but with really strong caveats. Examples included the following. Yes, I am satisfied, but I would with strong warnings if you would recommend the services that you're receiving. So again, I would recommend the services just because it establishes a legal obligation for accommodation. But the reality is that both the support services and professors aren't held accountable when supports are denied, even if they're documented. And again, these are direct quotes from the survey. And quote, better to have something than nothing, end of quote. Quote, they are the only option, but I would warn people to be prepared to act strategically to avoid pain, end of quote. Therefore, I am including that 5% as yes, no. And now I present the 5 films that were created based on our survey participants' experiences that were shared over and over again in the results. Note, none of us, with the exception of Simon, were trained actors. We were all amateurs, or at least we were when we started out on this journey. We all believe we are actors now. Now, when the actor portraying a student is actually pausing and looking directly into the camera and speaks a short monologue, these are exact quotes from the survey. So again, these films are not closed captioned or audio described right now. But when they are, I will definitely share with needs to be able to post on their website. So here is our first film, and it's called Barriers. And you'll meet 2 characters portrayed by my amazing research assistants, Anju Katie Miller and Taylor Glaspie. One character is a student, the other is not representing any person, department, or institution. They are portraying the system and the many barriers disabled students encounter.
Ableism is an ideology, a way of thinking that supports inequalities.
It is found in all aspects of our social world, including attitudes, cultural norms, and institutions of power. As a system of oppression, ableism positions disability as not normal, not valuable, while positioning the non-disabled as valuable, beautiful, normal. Key to understanding ableism is to recognize we are talking about settler ableism. Settler ableism is firmly embedded in patriarchal racial capitalism. As with all ideology, settler ableism is systemic and not always conscious or intentional. Evidence of systemic settler ableism are the many barriers disabled students experience in post-secondary education. Here is what those barriers look like for a disabled student trying to have equitable access to higher education. The first barrier a disabled student encounters at the institution is with the admissions process and admissions policies. 1, admissions requirements. 2, unclear application deadlines. 3, lack of clear navigation. 4, lack of information about supports. 5, jargon, not in plain language. If accepted, 6, lack of information about supports. 7, inaccessible physical space. And ultimately, 8, disclosure. When? How do I disclose? How much do I disclose? To whom do I disclose? 9, stigma around disability. 10, fear of discrimination. There are barriers accessing funding, which results in 11, more disclosure. 12, Appendix 8, now the student requires a diagnosis. 13, reduced course load. 14, full-time versus part-time. If they start the process of requesting accommodations, they experience additional barriers. 15, they have to reach out. 16, more disclosure. 17, wait to be contacted. 18, schedule a meeting. 19, have an intake meeting. 20, paternalistic attitudes. 21, there is high turnover with advisors, so there is more. 22, disclosure. 23, wait. 24, medical documentation, which requires. 25, more disclosure. 26, schedule a meeting with doctor if they have one. 27, get a psychoed assessment and or diagnosis. 28, which is expensive. 29, often met with paternalism. Back to services for students with disabilities. 30, schedule a meeting. 31, wait. 32, high turnover. 33, more forms. In the end, they often receive 34, cookie cutter accommodations caused by many factors, including 35, lack of knowledge and understanding. 36, reluctance. Faculty are often reluctant to share a syllabus in enough time before start of term to create appropriate accommodations. Finally, and hopefully, they make it to first class. Students generally go into the first day of class not knowing whether they have the appropriate accommodations or not. 37, so there is uncertainty. 38, if they don't have the right accommodations, they might have to drop the course. Then they face 39, financial penalty. Because it is the first week of the term, they can't always get into a new course. 40, so much lack of flexibility. 41, if they stay in the course, the accommodation is usually communicated to the instructor. 42, there is more disclosure. 43, they might face more paternalism. 44, faculty confusion. 45, lack of knowledge and understanding. 46, lack of faculty training. For many disabled students, once assignments and assessments start, they face even more barriers, so many that we cannot list them all. Why so many barriers? 47, the system is not accountable. There are no consequences when a student does not receive the supports they need and have a right to. 48, no accountability can hide behind undue hardship, which is fueled by the general stigma around disability and settler ableist attitudes and fantasies about what a post-secondary student should be like. The fantasy student is the one to spend money on, not the student who disrupts that fantasy. The effects all this has on students: 49, lack of social support. 50, lack of autonomy. 51, exhaustion.
from having to self-advocate constantly. 52, lack of belonging. 53, isolation. 54, disengagement. 55, withdrawal, emotionally and from education. Where is that student now? They are gone from view, out of sight, not a fantasy, just forgotten. Ableism.
So now, of course, the medical model and its paternalism was not only shared in the survey results, but also in our live performance, where an audience member commented, "Why can't they just believe us?" Now, our second film is titled Diagnosis, and the actors are Bibek Gadu, Prab Gill, Anju Miller, myself, Fiona Whittington-Walsh, and Holly Hermiston. And the film starts off in a classroom.
Excuse me, Professor. I was hoping I could talk to you about our individual presentations.
Sure, yes, of course. What questions do you have?
So it's not really a question, but I have extreme anxiety, and speaking in front of the class is just something I cannot do.
Oh, well, we all get a little nervous, even me standing in front of the class. But you know, there's an old saying that says that if you don't feel a little nerves, it means you won't give a good performance. So you'll be fine.
It's not even about the nerves. I just have extreme anxiety, and I don't think I would be able to speak in front of the whole class.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, there is a university policy that states that you need to get a formal letter of accommodation from accessibility services. Would you like me to set you up with an appointment?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. I need to get these assessments done by a doctor, and it's really difficult to see a doctor right now. And mine's usually booking weeks in advance. The presentations are coming up soon, and I'm just really worried. Maybe I can go to the walk-in clinic. Come enjoy. Hello. Hi, how may I help you today? Just these forms for today. Let's have a look. I'm sorry, those have a history with you. I can't give you an official diagnosis. Oh, don't you have a family doctor you can get an appointment with? Okay. Joy?
Hello, how are you today? It's been a while since I've seen you. Your last checkup was in 2014. How may I help you today?
Hi, yeah, well, I'm taking some class at the university.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, and as you remember in the past, I struggle with anxiety and I just have difficulty in crowds.
Well, that was when you were quite young.
Well, I'm finding that it is getting worse and worse, and I'm supposed to give an oral presentation in front of the class, and I really just can't do it. And like talking about it right now with the anxiety I'm feeling. I even spoke with my instructor and the student services, and they need me to get the diagnosis so I can get an official accommodation.
If you remember in the past, I have told you, you need to figure out ways to help yourself. There isn't a magic pill that I can prescribe to you because there isn't anything medically wrong with you. There is nothing medically wrong with you, so I can't fill out any forms documenting that there is a medical diagnosis.
I never did get my accommodations. Why? Because I didn't have a diagnosis from the doctor. It meant that I didn't qualify. This is really affecting my right to pursue post-secondary education. It's just so unfair. I believe you.
I listened to you.
I hear you.
In this next film, paternalism will be demonstrated by the accessibility services specialist as well as from the instructor, who demonstrates paternalism through kindness and empathy directed, for the most part, towards other students, those without disabilities. This film is called It's About Time, and the actors are Lucy Driver, Simon Driver, and Bibik Gadu.
Okay, everyone, look at that. We have run out of time. Remember, we are not meeting next week because you will be writing your midterm. It's online and is open book. You will have 1 hour to complete the midterm. I will post a study review by the end of the week. I will see everyone in 2 weeks.
Professor, I was wondering if I could speak to you about the midterm.
Yes, of course.
Well, I was wondering if you got my letter from Student Services saying that I needed extra time on tests.
I don't remember getting any letter. The test is online and open book, so I don't think you'll need extra time.
Knowing that I have extra time can help me. Sometimes I need the extra time, but sometimes I don't.
I don't remember seeing any documentation from Student Services, so I'm afraid I can't just give you extra time. That won't be fair to all of the other students. Unless you get documentation, I won't be able to help you. It's not personal, believe me. It's just we remain fair to everyone and must always uphold academic standards.
Sorry, Professor. I do have formal accommodations. It's just I don't know why you didn't receive them. I could try to book a meeting with Student Services as soon as possible. Maybe they can resend it to you. It's just the test is next week and I'm getting really anxious and nervous.
Yes, that's a good idea. You get a meeting with them and have them send it to me ASAP, which the test is next week.
Hi, thanks for coming in.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate you meeting with me.
So, Bailey, what can we do for you?
Well, my professor seems to be confused as to what accommodations I have. He said he didn't receive my accommodation letter, and that causes a lot of anxiety for me.
Okay, let me just pull up your file.
I can tell you what supports I need. It's
I knew, just give me a minute, okay? Diver, D-I-R.
Driver, D-R-I-V-E-R.
Of course, D-R-E-R. Yeah, it says here you have. And
Yes, well, what I need right now is extra time on my midterm, and my professor doesn't know how to do this, and he doesn't even know if I should get extra time.
general accommodations, okay, for people with here, things like note taking, audio recording of lectures. Doesn't your professor provide you with these things?
Well, I actually take really good notes, and I attend every class. It's just sometimes I need extra time on a test, or maybe even a little bit of time to finish an essay. Thanks for meeting with me.
Yeah, well, healthy time management is an important skill.
I actually have really good time management. It's just I need extra time on tests.
Yes, well, most people with need things like audio recording of lectures and note taking. I can write an official accommodation letter stating that you need things like note taking and audio recording of lectures. Doesn't your professor provide you with these things? Has he not reached out to you about audio recording? Do you have a note taker in class, an official note taker in class? I can request it for an official note taker in class.
I'm so stressed about my test next week. All I needed was extra time. Why do I have to see someone who doesn't understand what I need? I mean, they have new people here all the time, and I have to keep going over and over about what I need. It just makes me want to shut down and not want to engage with anyone.
This idea that academic accommodations somehow are an unfair advantage for disabled students once again emphasizes how disabled students disrupt the myth of who the ideal university student is. Disabled students regrettably encounter varying levels of faculty willingness to support accommodation requests. For example, disabled students from Ontario have indicated that this variability has not substantively improved with the implementation of the accessibility legislation. Instructors struggle with understanding accommodations and how to implement them in classes. In the survey, we asked the following question. Do your instructors provide your approved accommodations? Now, it is in the responses of students who identified as neurodiverse that we see for the first time in the results, students writing, I don't know. So again, do your instructors provide your approved accommodations? Neurodiverse students, 38% said yes, 32% said no, and 20% said, I don't know. There is little to no accountability for instructors to provide the approved accommodations. There is also a great deal of confusion about what to do when we receive accommodation requests. There is a lack of training and understanding regarding disability and accommodations. The fact that students don't know if they are in fact getting the accommodations they have a right to demonstrates that passivity that the medical model forces disabled students into. Now, our fourth film is called Flare Up, and the actors are Ava Popowich, Daniel Jin, Bibik Gaddu, Holly Hermiston, Adam Skelly, Andrew Miller, and Lucy Driver.
I had asked the instructor at the beginning of the semester for extra time for several assignments, anticipating that I would need it. I wanted to ask about extra time for my assignment.
Sure, you're going to have speak to accessibility services.
I'm just letting you know in advance because I anticipate.
Again, accessibility services, Chloe.
Right, okay.
Chloe?
Yes, that's me.
So we will need to see your assessment form.
Right.
Good, excellent. You can expect your accommodations to be shared with your instructor soon.
Okay, thank you. So it's pretty straightforward? I mean, yeah, the intake was long and kind of weird, and the appendix 8 was a pain because I don't have a doctor, so I had to go to the clinic. But at least now that's done. They were super nice and helpful.
Right on. Super happy for you. Does the prof know?
I guess. I mean, they haven't said anything.
Have they at least read the accommodations?
That's one part I'm unclear on.
Okay, folks, please be sure with chapter 10, not chapter 9 before class.
I wanted to ask, Professor?
Yes?
I wanted to ask about my accommodations and whether you've received them.
Yes, thank you. I actually wanted to ask you about them. I'm glad you brought them up. There was a mention of if and when you have a flare-up. I'd like some clarification on flare-up. Can you tell me what this means, flare-up? The form just doesn't explain what flare-up means.
Here I was, after all the steps I had taken, having to explain my disability again to someone I hardly know. I thought the accommodations were supposed to help prevent moments like this and protect my right to privacy. I'm angry, disappointed, and scared. In the end, I explained my flare-ups because honestly, it was the easiest thing to do in the moment. It seems like every semester, at least one teacher has a lot of difficulty understanding what to do, and I have to deal with the stress of this and spend a lot of time explaining and advocating for myself. They need to understand that having a disability is not a choice. and I can't just get rid of it because it's inconvenient to them.
I understand.
I understand.
I understand.
Now, in the live performance, the audience had the ability to vote for one of the vignettes, which they wanted to revisit in order to identify the barriers and together to create solutions to dismantling the barriers. And this is another key aspect of Boel's work. The audience overwhelmingly chose our final vignette, the note taker, as the one that they wanted to revisit. And the note taker has the actors Adam Skelly, Taylor Glaspie, Fiona Whittington-Walsh, Prob Gill, and Bibik Gadu.
Okay, now finally, I need to know, is there anyone in the class who's willing to be a volunteer to be a note taker for one of your peers? Okay, well, if anyone wants to volunteer, please let me know.
I fought very hard for a year to get a note taker, and now it seems like there isn't going to be anyone to take notes and share them with me.
Adam, could you please come here? So I don't know what we're gonna do if no one volunteers to be a note taker. Don't you have anyone in the class who can share their notes with you?
Not in this class, no. I feel very isolated in all my classes because of students being scared to come near me, as the first thing they see is my disability. There's a lot of exclusion that students with disabilities face in educational settings.
Well, it's early days. It's only week 3. Maybe someone will step forward.
Okay.
What can I help you with?
They can't find a note taker for the class. The instructor keeps asking the class, but no one's volunteered. I feel like I'm being outed each time they ask the class, so what should I do?
Well, maybe you record the lecture. Let me check your accommodations and see if that's a possibility. Yeah, it looks like you have that accommodation. So here's a document that I need you to sign, and it's an agreement for you to record the lectures. So sign it, and then I can send it to your instructor.
Recording the lectures isn't perfect. I really need someone to take notes so I can read them. But having the lectures recorded is better than nothing. Since no one has volunteered to be a note taker, I have this agreement form from Student Services to record lectures.
Oh dear, that's not gonna work. I don't allow students to record my lectures for many reasons.
If you see on the form, it says the recording is just for my personal use. I'll not share the recording with anyone. See, it says right here, recorded information is not to be shared, released, or published in any way without the express written consent of the instructor. And I also have to destroy it when the course is over. I've signed the form and agreed to all the terms.
I'm afraid I don't allow anyone to record my lectures. These lectures are my academic property, and I need to be able to control how and when they're used. So I'm afraid my answer to recording lectures is no. I'll ask the class again if anyone can volunteer to be a note taker.
Instructors seem to put students with disabilities on the spot, and I felt left out or excluded for using my accommodations. I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's week 4, and I have no way to receive my accommodations. I think I might have to withdraw from the class and take the financial penalty. I'm worried, however, this will affect my student loan because I can't go below full time. It might also affect receiving any awards. So I'm going to warn fellow students how dehumanizing, triggering, complicated, unhelpful, and frustrating it is to get academic supports and accommodations. It's like managing a part-time job, and it takes up a lot of energy on the student's part to manage the university disability support system. Thank you for telling me.
Why don't we speak to our student union?
Oops, sorry. The note taker is accurate in its description of issues with trying to provide a, quote, legitimate accommodation, end of quote, of note taking. Instructors generally have to ask for volunteers. Further, audio recording lectures allow students with disabilities an equitable opportunity to receive, record, and process information presented in class. Audio recordings can sometimes be the equivalent of written notes taken by other students. Many faculty openly refuse to allow recording of lectures, citing it somehow impinges on their academic property. Now, what next for this project? So, of course, various provinces across Canada, have legislation and standards will be introduced. We will need to make sure we don't just abide by standards, however. We must transform the colonial ableist post-secondary institution. The goal of my research is to consolidate the critical disability pedagogy that is Including All Citizens pathway with Indigenous solidarity, including Indigenous models of disability and this research. This will become the model for transformation of post-secondary education. I'm collaborating with several experts in creating this new model for how disabled post-secondary students receive supports, including Dr. Rihanna Robson. I hope to also include needs in this work. This project, including all of the films, will be shared on its fully accessible website. And as I said, I'm working with the Vancouver company who is closed captioning and audio describing all of the films. And Simon and I are writing an article about theater as research, theater as pedagogy, and theater as disability justice. Now, in conclusion, we are all witnesses to our students' experiences. I want to assure all the students who shared their stories with us, we heard you. We are listening. We have not forgotten you. Your experiences, your stories are imprinted on us, just as Walter Benjamin wrote in his famous essay, The Storyteller, imprinted on us the way the handprints of the potter cling to the clay vessel. Your experiences matter, and together we will transform the system. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Fiona. That presentation was so very informative and it demonstrates such innovative thinking when it comes to awareness and education. So thank you. We we do have a few moments left, so I'm wondering if you might be willing to entertain any questions if we have any.
Absolutely, yes.
Think if folks have any questions for Fiona, you can write them in the chat or voice them.
Even just comments is fine too. You don't have to necessarily have a question, but any comments, feedback. I think there's a question from Narada. How do we can make a difference and take action based on this information? That's a really good question. I mean, I'm trying to change this system, and it's a really ancient colonial system. And I don't think we can actually, there's been a lot of discussions over the past several years in post-secondaries about decolonizing. And I really do not believe that you can decolonize a colonial institution, but you can transform it. And through the research, and definitely from the work of Laverne Jacobs, who is Canada's representative to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, a legal scholar who really focuses on all kinds of aspects of disability law, but particularly has done some amazing work on post-secondary. She reviewed all of the Human Rights Tribunal cases from, I can't remember the years, but her article came out last year, so 2024 in September, it came out. And she found that 72% of the cases that were brought forward by post-secondary students with disabilities were regarding in-class accommodations. And the majority of the cases were thrown out before they even got to the tribunals, mainly because students don't understand the process of launching a human rights tribunal case. So it's really important that we make sure that our student unions understand that process, and for students to be able to use that process when they're the supports that they need are being denied. So I think that's a really important thing for students to know, that there is a very, very formal judicial process involved with those human rights tribunal cases. And so, as Laverne Jacob concludes, that when students are aware of that process, then we'll start to see a lot more cases coming through the various human rights tribunals. Okay, there's another comment from Narada. Oh, as a person with multiple disabilities, many aspects of those movies resonated with me. One of them is high turnovers with advisors. Over and over again, all of these vignettes were created out of the lived experiences from our survey responses. I have close relationship with mine, but it is really frustrating to see the high turnovers and how some of them don't have living experiences. What can we do about it? Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's some students have amazing experience. Again, it's that relationship piece that is central. So when you can forge a relationship with the advisors, it seems to really help with receiving the appropriate accommodations. What I'm trying to work on is we've reviewed all of the accommodation policies, and I haven't found one yet where there's rights and responsibilities for instructors. So that's where that lack of accountability comes into play. So I have written the rights and responsibilities for instructors, and I'm starting, the university wants me to kind of do a soft launch. They're saying, well, maybe you should release it as a guide. And I'm like, well, no, it needs to be part of the policy, right? There needs to be accountability from instructors, because that was something that was very clear in the survey results. It's not just about the accessibility services, it's the instructors not understanding. And again, going back to that 20% of students that identify as neurodiverse, not knowing, and you saw that in a flare-up film, a student not knowing if they're getting the accommodation, if the instructor even knows what to do. So I think it's really important to make sure that this is part of policy, so that instructors are held accountable. And it's a long process because it involves the faculty union. It's a extra work stipulations added, so the instructors are saying. But again, I'm the one that I don't mind being the unpopular one in the room of faculty at faculty council meetings. I'm there to make sure that we change the system, and this is one of the ways that we can change it. Oh, and I think we have a raised hand.
Hi, thank you. My name is Shane. First, I just want to thank you for putting this event on, and thank you for speaking today. I just had a question. It's in regards to the Accessible BC Act and some of the new standards that are going to be coming out soon. Do you think that this legislation and any of the incoming standards and regulations that are going to be coming on are going to be moving us closer towards this model that you speak of? Or do you think that it is going to be sort of pushing us still towards this medical model of accommodations?
Hey, it's a really excellent question, Shane. The Accessible BC Act, there's no accountability for any aspect of the Act. So it's not, I mean, none of our legislation has gone as far as the Americans with Disability Act, which is a civil rights law, right? So that the federal government will sue on your behalf. And the Accessible BC Act is really about thinking that institutions will want to change because it's the right thing to do, but there's nothing to stop institutions from not making any kind of positive change. So I'm not particularly very hopeful. And as a very good friend of mine who's a disability activist in BC, Paul Kahn, says, hope is not a plan. So we can't use hope. But we're closely looking at some of the other standards from maybe Manitoba and Ontario, the post-secondary standards. And I'm committed to making this model. And I'm hoping that my university is the one to adopt this model. And so because it has to be, and I actually had the president of our university, when I gave this presentation, ask me if, he said, well, you know, do you think that some aspects of the medical model can remain in this new model? And I'm like, no, no, it has to go completely. And again, thinking about including all citizens, where it's providing supports for faculty. So our students, the students that come through, including all citizens, don't have to go to get any kind of formal accommodations. Now, that being said, if students need a American Sign Language interpretation, I can't provide that out of my bag of teaching tricks. So there is a need for those kinds of services and making sure that we have connections to provide that kind of support. But it's all about making sure that we're providing the support in the classroom. So if one student needs note-taking, for example, and that was the vignette that people really wanted to talk about, we proposed at KPU to pay students for being note takers. Like, there's a way. I mean, it's very accurate. We asked for volunteers, nobody volunteers. But if it was a paid position, then we're recognizing student labor that's going involved in creating the notes. And then what I would do is share them with everybody in the class. And so I'm sort of doing a trial and error with note collaboration in the classroom, so that at the end of each lecture, students get into small groups and they collaborate and pick up 5 important things that they heard in that lecture and document it. And then we compile it and share it with everyone. So that's part of the pedagogy, that there isn't special people that need a special support. We're recognizing that probably more than one person in that classroom would benefit from extra time or note taking or whatever it is. So we try to build that right into our teaching. Mind you, we do have, we hire students to be educational support students. And we offer a homework club after class for anybody who wants to come and finish assignments. So you're almost getting like tutoring support there with folks that have been trained with recognizing what supported learning looks like. And so we're doing those things with including all citizens. So I'm thinking that, I mean, of course it costs money, but again, that's kind of the model. So what I'm looking at now is, how do we bring that model to right across the institution? And also, like, recognizing all of the barriers, like with the admissions, like there are just so many barriers with the registrar's office that I keep encountering. Like each term there's a new one. And they're very receptive to me telling them that this is an ableist barrier and trying to come up with ways of dismantling that barriers, but it's really embedded in all the systems. So it's about trying and one piece at a time, really trying to get rid of all the ableist barriers.
Thank you, Fiona, for sharing your brilliance with us. We only have a few minutes left, so I would like to take the opportunity to thank our guests and interpreters for supporting us to make an accessible and inclusive event. As a reminder, the recording for this webinar will be available on Nick's YouTube channel, and we will send an email to all participants when it's live. Finally, if you have any feedback or questions for Nick, do not hesitate to contact one of my team members. Our contact information is available on links.ca. And with this, I will close the webinar and we can start the record.